Hi guys, so our next poet is William Carlos Williams, another modernist poet. He was born on September 17th, 1883. He had an English father and a Puerto Rican mother, and his mother was of French, Dutch, Spanish, and Jewish ancestry. His family provided him with a background in art and literature, and although he pursued math and science in high school, he did enjoy literature and writing. He went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied medicine and was a doctor for more than 40 years in New Jersey. He delivered approximately 2,000 babies, and many of his patients weren't even aware of his writing. Williams was a friend of Ezra Pound, who you just read his poem, The River Merchant's Wife. And Williams once said that before meeting Pound is like BC and AD. Like that is how significant of an impact Pound had on him. In case you're not sure, BC references before Christ, and AD references after his death. His poetry was centered on everyday circumstances of life and the lives of common people. And a man named Randall Jarrell said that Williams' poetry is remarkable for its empathy, sympathy, its muscular and emotional identification with its subjects. There's no optimistic blindness in Williams, which really reminds us of, really reminds me of Gatsby. There's this optimism that blinds you. And I mean, we see this a lot in modernist literature where people, like in the short stories, they're not really like hopeful and happy. It's a time of disillusionment. Actually, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So, Ezra Pound founded this movement known as Imagism, and William Carlos Williams also kind of emulated it in his work. So, Imagism, Imagist poetry, it uses really simple language. So just normal common speech that people use every day, really easy to understand, very precise in word choices, and just using lots of concrete images, like just explaining a flower or table or whatever. Most of the time they're written in free verse, I think all the time, and that means the poetry does not have a rhyme scheme or a regular meter, so there's not like a certain amount of syllables in every line. And Imagist poems, there's just a greater freedom of expression. There's more diverse choices of subject matters. So I know that, I wish I could remember the poem, but I think it was William Carlos Williams, and he writes this poem about like a piece of fruit that his wife ate and he wanted. I mean, it can be that simple. So, some themes that are found in modernist poetry. These are going to sound really close to the modernist short stories you guys did because it's at the same time period. So feelings of disillusionment, hopefully that makes you think of winter dreams, where things just aren't as good as what you imagined them to be. This largely stems from World War I and its aftermath. You also have a time when people are questioning their faith, and so you have some religious skepticism, and you can see that in some of the poems. And because of that, some spiritual emptiness as well. And lastly, feelings of alienation, which will make you hopefully think of the modernist short stories like Granny Weatherall. So, we are going to look at the poem really quick. So, the poem that we're going to study first is The Widow's Lament in Springtime. So here's the whole poem, and it's actually just one stanza. I've just broken it up into three to fit it on the page. So, sorrow is my own yard, where the new grass flames as it has flamed often before, but not with the cold fire that closes round me this year. 35 years I lived with my husband. The plum tree is white today, with masses of flowers. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches and color some bushes yellow and some red, but the grief in my heart is stronger than they. For though they were my joy formerly, today I notice them and turn away forgetting. Today my son told me that in the meadows, at the edge of the heavy woods, in the distance, he saw trees of white flowers. I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. So the poem is written from the widow's perspective after she's lost her husband. And so what I did was I actually just scanned my annotations of the poem, and I'm just going to talk through them with you. So let's start here. So a widow, I'm sure you know this, but it's a woman whose husband has died, and it's told from her perspective. To lament is an expression of sorrow, and this is happening in springtime. And this is ironic because you would expect this to be happening in like the winter, right? Like death and sadness, but it's happening in springtime, like which suggests like babies being born and new life and happiness, and so it's just a bit of irony because it's not what you would expect. So the first line says, "Sorrow is my own yard," and you've got a metaphor here. You've also got a double possessive with my own, which could suggest that the sorrow is a part of her, that she can't get away from it, with the use of that double possessive. Also, the fact that the sorrow, her sadness, is her yard, like could suggest that her sadness surrounds her. Maybe she feels really isolated, and I also put, it may make her think of her husband, because I was thinking like if her husband, let's say he did all the yard work, and so when she looks outside her house and she sees the yard, maybe it makes her think of her husband, and it makes her sad. So then she goes on to say, "Where the new grass flames as it has flamed often before." So new grass, just a reminder about spring, and so you've got this literal like flames, like it's how the grass looks, like it kind of looks like it's flames going out, and this could be like kind of comforting and warm, but also flames have connotations of like burning and destruction. It's hot, things die, it's dangerous, that sort of thing. Flames can also kind of suggest passion, and anger, perhaps. So just lots and lots of different connotations of the word that you could consider if you were writing about it. And so the new grass flames as it has flamed often before. So kind of just reminding us that like the kind of the cycle of the seasons, right? Like it's done this before, it's doing it again. But this time, when it does it, but it's never done it with the cold fire that closes round me this year. So cold fire, you've got like this oxymoron, because you wouldn't call fire cold. Cold kind of connotations of it. You might think of the flu. You might think like you're sick. You might think cold like is in the color blue. Cold is in winter, snow. Cold is in death, like someone dying, or being alone, like having no one to like love and hug you and comfort you and hold you. You might think of someone being cold like they're upset, like give you the cold shoulder. You might think of cold as like a numbness. This idea of cold fire like being painful. It could be like it's so cold it hurts. Nothing comforts or warms her. Things like that. So this next line is really interesting. She feels like the cold fire closes around her this year, which kind of gives a sense of claustrophobia, like she feels trapped. This idea that it's really depressing, she can't escape, it's scary, maybe it's like she's doomed, which also links back to like the modernist elements of kind of this alienation and feeling alone. Then this next sentence is very short, and there's a shift. 35 years I lived with my husband. It's just like how life-changing when you're with one person for 35 years and now they're gone. It's a very short, simple sentence. It's very powerful, like just using the short sentence like this, and starting with how many years. It's just this deep sense of loss, and it just really stands up to me. So then you've got this other shift, and now she's going to start talking about, like, I'm assuming, like, what she sees outside her window. So spring has blossomed. The plum tree is white today with masses of flowers. So connotations of white, again, we think like of it being cold, maybe death, but white can also make us think of like a wedding, purity, heaven, an angel, or it can make us think of like surrendering. So just different ideas you could talk about if you were looking at that word. And the plum tree is white today. So think about why the writer decided to use that. And he decided to say that it had masses of flowers. Now, masses, it might make you think of like a mass, like a Catholic church service. Um, but also masses, like there's like a weight and a heaviness to this. Like you feel like flowers are supposed to be good, although I guess they can also be, oh, I wrote it here, like a wedding, like someone gives them to they love you, but there can also be at a funeral. So you've got these masses of flowers, and this is repeated. So the plum tree is white today with masses of flowers. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches. So just and the word load too. This weight, this heaviness. Like it's supposed to be happy, but maybe it's kind of weighing you down. It reminds you that your husband's not there, perhaps. Um, so then it says the cherry branches in color, some bushes yellow and some red. So like immediately you think of yellow, you think of happiness, you think of red, you think of love. And then she goes on to say, but the grief in my heart is stronger than they. So things like how you could read that is like maybe like flowers used to make her happy, or nature or spring, like it used to make her happy, but it doesn't anymore. Um, or like her faith used to make her happy, like maybe um, like she used to believe in God, but she doesn't anymore. Um, just as feelings of like religious skepticism and disillusionment, like how like when some people lose loved ones, they stop believing in God. So it could just suggest that like these things that used to make her happy, they don't anymore. Like her sadness is stronger than them. Um, she says, "For they were my joy formerly. Sorry, for though they were my joy formerly, today I notice them and turn away, forgetting." So the fact that she turns away from them, like it suggests it's a choice. She doesn't want to see it. Maybe she doesn't want to be happy. Maybe it's too hard for her to be happy because it's like, why? Like, how can I be happy when he's dead? You know? Um, or maybe there's like a sense of denial, right? Like she just doesn't want to accept it. Oh, I said maybe she feels guilty for being happy too. So then you have another shift, and she's talking about this advice that her son gave her. Um, so kind of like you have to go through these trials to get to something good. It's kind of like what he seems to be, or what you could like infer from this. So he seems to want to help his mom. She's pretty alone in her sorrow. So what he says is that he told me that in the meadows, at the edge of the heavy woods, in the distance, he saw trees of white flowers, which suggests that like there might be hope out there, there might be peace out there, goodness, maybe heaven, um, especially if, let's just say, she's questioning her faith or something like that, or like to remind her about her husband. Um, or maybe he's saying it because he's like, Mom, there's hope for you out there. There's peace. There's goodness. You're going to be okay. But the fact that, like, these are white flowers are really far away, right? Like, this list of three in the meadows, at the edge of the heavy woods, in the distance, like, it kind of, like, emphasizes how far away this might feel for her, this hope, this peace, this comfort. So looking at heavy woods, you've got again like this idea of weight, like kind of weighing her down, like with masses and load, and now the word heavy. It could be a metaphor for her mind, like the heavy woods, like she feels really lost. Yeah, like you're in the middle of a lot of trees, you don't know where you are. The woods, like it could be dark, and just I don't know, just a very painful place to be. So she says, I feel that I would like to go there. Like, it's like she wants it, but she seems unsure. Like, I feel like I would like it. Maybe she doesn't know if she's capable. Maybe it feels too hard. Maybe she just feels too guilty about being happy. But then this next part, you can definitely read a couple ways, but one interpretation definitely stands out the most. So I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. So, like, fall into those flowers, it suggests, like, the fact that she falls, it suggests that she's in control, right, in a way. Like, she chooses to fall into them. Perhaps this could come across as being really peaceful. Um, Kind of this idea that, like, flowers kind of could remind you of, like, maybe their wedding or like their love for each other, that maybe now they're like reunited. um, and they can also make you think of a funeral. Then she says, and sink into the marsh near them. Now, a marsh is like a swamp. And so the fact that she wants to sink into the swamp, I mean, how unpleasant is a swamp, a marsh? So the fact that she wants to sink into the marsh near them, like, almost suggests that she wants to drown herself, commit suicide, because like she feels like she can't go on. Like, um, maybe it's because of like the loss of her husband and how sad she feels. Maybe it's like a loss of her faith. But she feels like she just maybe can't keep going. This makes me think of Ophelia. I don't know if you've read Hamlet. If you're going to do AP Lit next year, you'll read Hamlet. But Ophelia, in there, she actually commits suicide by drowning herself, because of like her sadness at losing some family members. So, very reflective of that. I mean, in a way, though, you could also interpret the last lines as being quite peaceful, like like um, like she would like to go into those flowers and like reconnect with nature and find some peace. And you could also read it as not a suicide as well, but it definitely comes across as a suicide to me, more. So, just looking at some structure things. So it's written in free verse, which means there's no set meter or rhyme scheme to it. Um, in a way, like, the structure of the poem is in like stark contrast to how she feels trapped, trapped in her sadness. Also, like, the fact that it's in free verse, it could suggest like the uncertainty of her life, because you don't know what's going to happen next, right? You don't know how many syllables are going to be next. There's no like rhyme scheme. You can't like predict what's going to happen. Which also could suggest like she can't control how she feels. Like, you can't control what really comes next. The lines are very short, and so there's like a lot of, well, not because I wrote on it, but there's a lot of like blank white on the page, which could suggest like the emptiness in her life, the absence of her husband. The short lines could also suggest like how short life is, or like how her mind, like, well, this is next. So there's a lot of enjambment, which means that there's no punctuation at the end of the line. So, like, in a way, you could read this, like, usually when there's enjambment, it makes it sound more like someone is just talking to you and not like a poem, which is true in this one as well. But you could also look at it a different way. So, because there's so much enjambment, it actually slows you down a little bit in reading, because your eyes have to shift down. So it might come across a little slower, a little choppier, and more maybe like broken speech. And so it could, kind of link to the fact that maybe she's struggling to find the words, like, because of her sadness, like, kind of like a dysfunction. Like, it's really hard for her to talk. It's really hard for her to like get out what she's feeling. So, anyways, that is William Carlos Williams, The Widow's Lament in Springtime. And I hope you liked it. And there's a quiz for you guys to do on Schoology after.